Noble Assembly a prosperous new year. To the hardworking but inadequately compensated, of course, staff of the Ministry of Finance, thank you for your sacrifices towards another budget. To all my other Guyanese brothers and sisters, I say to you, brace yourselves and don't be swindled by the numbers. Don't expect much as another budget for the elites is presented. Mr. Speaker, before I proceed to my presentation on the debates for Budget 2024, allow me to make two comments. The speaker from the government side who spoke just before the break for lunch did a folly of himself by comparing the APNO AFC 2015 budget allocation for capital expenditure to the 2024 allocations. What that speaker, Mr. Speaker, failed to tell the people of this country is the figure of the total budget for 2015 as compared to the now much touted 1.146 trillion Guyana dollars. In 2015, the budget was just for 5 months as compared to this one, which is for 12 months. 2015 budget was 221 billion, a mere fraction of 1.146 trillion. So, Mr. Speaker, even a primary school student would understand the comparison attempted by Mr. Indar, the honorable member. I say no more. Mr. Speaker, I would hope that the government speakers have so much to say. This is my second comment. This is in relation to the honorable member, Mr. Hamilton. Mr. Speaker, as a father, as a teacher, as a hard-working public servant of this country, I strongly object to the reference of persons' children. I would hope that the government speakers have so much to say in this $1.46 trillion budget that time will not permit them such utterances. But much to the dismay of those glued to their televisions and smartphones as they listen to this year's budget debates. Mr. Speaker, it is no secret that the cost of living and the hardships associated with such have forced the ordinary, hard-working, and decent citizens of this nation to the precinct of marginal existence and survival. It takes great skill and resilience to survive in the current environment, where most consumers in the streets of Georgetown and elsewhere will tell you in no uncertain terms that the prices of basic commodities have risen by far more than 2%. Inflation rate that was reported in this National Assembly. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that every Guyanese household will tell us that they had to expend more than 6.5% of their incomes to meet the basic needs of food, transportation, and rent. A cursory understanding of economies tell us that once households are forced to spend more to meet the basic of daily survival, a reduction of disposable income and savings follow. In other words, the future of such households seems very bleak and heading into a very uncertain times. Mr. Speaker, of all the budgets presented by the PPC government since 2020, this is the only one I will change just one word of the team presented by the Honorable Minister of Finance. Should I rephrase, the Honorable Senior Minister in the Office of the President with responsibility for finance. Mr. Speaker, a classical theme for Budget 2024, staying the course, building prosperity for some. The only word I'll change here is all to some. The PVC is well on course as they build prosperity for their elites and well-known 3Fs, something Guyanese have grown weary of. Mr. Speaker, it is alarming that the government prioritizes infrastructure over social policies, and we know from reports and experiences that this creates fissures for something known to many of us, a word that is not permitted to be used in this National Assembly. The figure for our national budget, now in the trillion, does not necessarily impress the ordinary man, especially now that majority of Guyanese are still crying out as they struggle to make ends meet. Something the honorable members of the government may not agree with, but in order for them to agree with this, you must attempt yourself to live on the minimum wage as many Guyanese do every single day of their lives. Mr. Speaker, one would question whether the government priority is on our people or just a highlighted or selected few. Selected, of course, by their own bigoted policies. Mr. Speaker, the government came to the National Assembly last year with additional financial papers. As my colleague mentioned earlier, the Honorable Director of Finance. Is this the real budget? This is a clear indication that the ordinary man must not be duped to expect any massive ease in the struggle of his daily life. Budget 2024 is another disaster to the poor, but of course, an illuminated Disney World for a few and their friends. Mr. Speaker, the figures in any budget is critical and important. What is equally important, Mr. Speaker, is efficiency and responsible spending, compounded by accountability and transparency. Something on which most of my presentation will be based as it relates to the Barima-Waini region. I'm not, Mr. Speaker, too fancy about the figures budgeted. What we are fancy about is whether or not our people benefit from those allocations. Mr. Speaker, contemporary wisdom tells us that prosperity is a multidimensional and multifaceted concept. The World Bank Group tells us that prosperity speaks to an enhanced human well-being, measured by achieved economic growth and development. Enhanced human well-being, balanced with a quality environment. Again, I say, is this a reality for many Guyanese? The answer is a resounding no. Building prosperity for some. Of course, they will say yes. Prosperity also takes into consideration human element of development and concerted efforts at poverty eradication and expanding human freedoms, social cohesion, justice, and maintaining adequate standards of living. Again, building prosperity for a few. Mr. Speaker, I turn my attention to an issue that is affecting the residents of Region 1, and to be specific, the villagers of Chinese Landing. Mr. Speaker, another sore issue, one might describe as blatant disrespect of indigenous brothers and sisters in Chinese landing. Contrary to the position of the Honorable Minister of Amerindian Affairs, the Honorable Pauline Sukai, the villagers never seek to cease mining totally. They seek to cease mining in part of their village called Tasiwini. I want to quote, Mr. Speaker, from the article presented here by IACHR. The petition indicates that the members of the indigenous Carib community of Chinese landing are facing threats, harassment, and acts of violence in the context of their opposition to activities in their lands. The representatives allege repetitive incidents of threats and harassment which would occur daily or regularly, inform and acts against persons in particular vulnerability, such as aggression to a young man, attempted rape of a minor, and threat with a knife against an elder person, as well as the extensive use of firearms with firing incidences. Firing incidents. The beneficiaries have also received collective death threats, reportedly perpetrated by mine workers. For example, the Tushao, who is the leader of this community, was allegedly warned that if the village wins its lands back, the miners would not leave easily and people would die. It is, Mr. Speaker, a national embarrassment that this government, through the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs, may want to distance themselves from the side of the residents of Chinese landing. I trust that when the Honorable Minister of Amerindian Affairs and her time comes to speak, she will bring much clarity to the issue. And of course, decide on which side of the fence she stands as it relates to the livelihood of the indigenous people of this nation. Mr. Speaker, there are many more information detailed in this document that I'm willing to share. If time permits, I'd like to return and quote a few more. Mr. Speaker, this level of disregard and disrespect for the indigenous people, I believe, has seeped into the halls of this august chambers with offensive names calling, baseless accusation of our elected indigenous representatives with misappropriation of public funds. Mr. Speaker, name calling will not deter us, even as we challenge those on the government side to bring the evidence. For we were never, at least we were never escorted by persons in specific color of clothing, with the flexibility and free will of our limbs restricted. Staying the course, building prosperity for some, a classical theme. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2024 measures does not adequately address any serious attempts at prosperity for all. Since the PPC civic government took office in 2020, the allocation and distribution of state resources have been skewed in favor of some. This budget proposal reinforces the inequality and inequity that is the character of this PPC government approach of projects and policies. Mr. Speaker, the indigenous population of Guyana as of 2022 was projected to be approximately 10.5% of the total population. and the fourth largest ethnic group in Guyana. International Working Group for Indigenous Affairs 2022 as the source. As a minority group, Mr. Speaker, indigenous contributions to national development is phenomenal. We are in the front lines to fight against climate change. We are in the front lines in the protection of Guyana's territorial integrity, and our lands and resources are in the front lines of the economic and social transformation of this country. Mr. Speaker, we are happy that the Honorable Minister and his government has allocated $9 billion to be spent on the development in indigenous communities across Guyana. While we are happy, and we welcome.
I'm happy to give you some more time, but someone would have to move that motion.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Comrade Speaker. I do move that the honourable member be given 5 minutes to conclude his presentation.
Thank you, honourable member. You have 5 minutes to conclude.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I like to quote from the Auditor General's report of 2023 as it relates to Region 1. The regional administration, this is on page 197. The regional administration breached the provisions of Section 43 of the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act 2003, when it failed at the end of the year to refund 755 checks totaling $771.898 million for the year 2022. As a result, the appropriation accounts were overstated by this amount. At the end of reporting in September 2023, 54 checks totaling $72.948 million had become stale dated and were still on hand. Mr. Speaker, the entire report on Region 1 is a nightmare. So like I said earlier, I'm not too fancy about the numbers budgeted for this region. We are more concerned with your accountability, your transparency, and your integrity. The citizens of Region 1 will judge you by that and not by the numbers that will be screamed here this afternoon. On page 199, commencement orders were not seen attached to payment vouchers, nor were they presented for the audit examination. As a result, it was difficult to determine the commencement dates and thus the scheduled completion dates for the contracts, something Region 1 has always been known for. And I guess my honorable friend, Mr. Colin Cole, knows this well, being the government MP with responsibility for Region 1. I wonder what his advice are when he visits those regions and speak with his colleagues of the RDC, more especially the regional executive officer. Mr. Speaker, on page 203, the audit office recommended that the regional administration should immediately desist from certifying payments for incomplete work with the intention to cut and hold a check. The regional administration should monitor the pace of works closely and encourage the contractor to expedite the completion of the works. Mr. Speaker, this is as a result of giving one man too many contracts that he cannot handle. And again, the budget building prosperity for some. It goes on, Mr. Speaker, to say, audit examination of payment vouchers and supporting documents revealed that details on the signing of the contract duration and the defects liability period could not be determined. A physical verification conducted on the 14th of July 2023 discovered that the site was abandoned and the works were incomplete, while our inspections, measurement, and calculation revealed an overstatement of $10.557 million as shown in the table below, and they have pictures as evidences of the abandoned site, Mr. Speaker. A classical picture of things happening within the Barima-Winey region. Mr. Speaker, as time does not permit me to elaborate on much more that is happening in my region, I'd like to turn my attention in closing, Mr. Speaker, to the report of the Auditor General on the assessment of the Ministries of Education Hinterland School Feeding Program. Briefly, students on page 1 not catered for due to poor planning. Meals not monitored for compliance with nutritional standards. Meals provided were not nutritious. Again, Mr. Speaker, it is not the figure that will be screamed here. It is the reality of my indigenous brothers and sisters, even at the level of the school system. Very sad. Mr. Speaker, there are other additional information that I wish to turn to, but I just want to conclude by saying, Mr. Speaker, there was during the debate when APNU AFC was in government, a very gentleman who is well known for his popular Channel at Sea comment, proposes 50% increase for public servant. In addition to that, another gentleman who is well known for not sticking to his words and becoming arrogant when questioned by ordinary Guyanese. In this very National Assembly question, with a screaming tone, what about our nurses? What about our teachers? Well, now the nurses and the teachers are asking, what about us? And he is in the position to ensure that he answers the question. And, Mr. Speaker, the question is not being answered. Mr. Speaker, finally, my final remark on Budget 2024. Budget 2024, Mr. Speaker. Final comment, yes.
Fortunately, I can't take the final comment because you're already 2 minutes over the 5 minutes, but I'll give you 30 seconds to wrap up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Let me conclude by saying that Budget 2024 is not supportive of the impoverished, nor is it favorable to public employees. I implore the members of the government to intensify their efforts in eradicating poverty, offering material support and assistance to economically disadvantaged families, especially those residing in rural areas, and to ensure that every child has access to reasonable standard of living. Budget 2024, staying the course, building prosperity for some. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. And now for the Honorable Lee Williams.